interbasin spraying at 4%. Interbasin might be a little underrepresented. I wasn't sure if we'd be running interbasin wells, which we started this week. Moving on to project updates, starting off with interbasin waterline. Thanks to Hunter Contracting, Jacobs Engineering, Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management funding. Interbasin waterline reconstruction is well underway. This construction year, Hunter's had, I think, 30 some staff working on 4 sites simultaneously, dedicated concrete crew. Last year, they were able to repair the pipeline, work on a handful of sites, access, egress, hazard tree removal, road grading. Here you see site I, one of the sites impacted the most after the pipeline fire and runoff, burn scar runoff the following monsoon season. You can just sort of see our pipeline, this noodle in the drainage here that was broken. So this is when Hunter started working on site I. And this is after they put up the structure last year. The ramp on top of this is just a little narrow, so we're going to be widening that from 12 to 15 feet, but that's site I, came out pretty well. Another before picture, this is up closer in the inner basin. You can see Bear Jaw Avenant Lower Weir building on the right that we don't use anymore. Also a cabin, our inner basin cabin, barely through the trees. And this is site A after Hunter completed that, most of that last year.
Hey, Brian, this is Kurt. Can I ask you, I can't, it looks like my screen. Can you move to presentation mode? Just make it a little bigger.
Sorry about that.
Unless, no worries. Thank you.
How's that?
Thank you so much.
Yep. So again, this is site A in the inner basin. You can see the Weir building to the left where that combined spring flow and well flow passes through. This was a site that occurred this year. This was not due to the pipeline fire burn scar runoff. This was a plugged junction or spring box that occurred just a little over a month ago. You can see it washed out the road. If any of you are familiar with Waterline Road, this is the tunnel, one of the only tunnel on the road. But this became impassable when that spring box was plugged. Fortunately, it didn't take Hunter too long. I think just a couple weeks to add these gabion baskets you can see on the right, a better lateral pipe coming off the spring box. I think you can see council member suite in this picture. Here's another site completed this year. I believe this is site 7. Just another example. I don't have a before picture of this one. Here we have Weatherford Canyon. I think this is site 28 on the left. Again, before you can see the destruction from the pipeline fire runoff. And on the right, the addition of gabion baskets, concrete mattress below, significant riprap, just in much better shape. Weatherford Canyon receives a lot of the runoff off the mountain, so this is a pretty important structure. And this might be my last picture of waterline reconstruction. This is site 29, one of the larger sites in Schultz Pass or 420, where Schultz Pass takes a pretty big bend. This one has a significant amount of concrete in it. You can see there's 2 concrete pour trucks. This one has since been completed. I think we just need a little bit of grading upstream of the site.
Brian, can I ask you a quick question?
Go ahead.
How many more of the structures are left to be built across areas where the road's been and water line's been taken out?
The pipeline's been repaired.
Right.
The pipeline's intact. There's a few structures to be built. A lot of the structures just needed rehabilitation or where the gabions were torn apart. They got additional baskets. Entirely new structures, I think, are complete. I think there's just a handful of structures that need to be
So it's just the work around the structures to finish them off?
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
So Hunter's well underway to wrap things up this year. We might have a GMP 5 or keep Hunter around in 2025 for any punch list items, any additional access egress for next year.
Just one last question. I actually rode my bike up there about a week or two ago, and I noticed that did it do any damage to the gas line? Because it really dug 15, 20 feet down in the area of the gas line. I'm just curious.
Um, I'm not sure that it did damage to the gas line, but I think it did enough to get them concerned.
Yeah.
So this is Weatherford Canyon Transwestern Pipeline is just downstream of this, and they have been working on their own mitigations. There was coordination with Jacobs Engineering and Hunter for both projects to meet as seamlessly as possible, since our site 28 is upstream of Transwestern.
Yeah. Thank you.
Moving on to tank maintenance, here you see our Railroad Springs tanks. On the right is our Railroad Springs #1. You can see the paint's not in very good shape. There's rust starting to occur on top of the storage tank. These are potable water storage tanks. Got these images thanks to IT, some city drone pilots just recently. Railroad Springs 1 will be getting a new paint job. Here you see Buffalo Park tank. This is a reclaim water tank, the only reclaim water storage tank in the reclaim system. You can see also the lid of the storage tank isn't in that good a shape. We'll be repainting this one. This one also has a mural that is planned for the tank. I'm not sure on which side. I assume the parking lot. Councilmember Sweet might know. But this tank should be in much better shape after rehabilitation. On the left, you see Kinlani tank, also has seen better days. And on the right, our Woody Mountain Booster Station 4 bay. All 4 tanks were solicited formally. Here you see the bids. Pretty good solicitation with the low bid, about a third of the high bid. So we'll be moving forward with Southwest Tank and Steel in the near future. I'm not sure if Southwest will be able to complete all 4 tanks this summer, but if not, it'll go into 2025. And just a couple other project updates. Water Services is kicking off design of our 27-inch raw water pipeline. This is the previous emergency repair that occurred in 2020 when the pipeline sprung a leak. So we're moving forward with design on 27-inch raw water pipeline replacement. And then lastly, here's a picture of the sedimentation basins at the Lake Mary Water Treatment Plant. We're also hoping to get a construction manager at risk solicitation moving forward in the near future. That's all I had. Any questions?
Where was the 27-inch raw water line?
From Upper Lake Mary, there's a 36-inch pipeline that runs to our raw water pump station. From the raw water pump station, it's a 27-inch that travels to the Lake Mary Water Treatment Plant. That 27-inch pipeline also extends out into distribution system near about Sam's Club. But the portion that we're looking to replace is primarily from the raw water pump station to the Lake Mary Water Treatment Plant.
And are there any new local new production wells in the planning for the near future?
We have our Fort Tuthill #2 well drilled and completed down hole. We're getting ready to move forward on design to bring that well into production or add to the Tuthill #1 well house. So while we have that well drilled, we haven't actually brought it into production yet. So that's in the works. And as for new production wells, I believe we're still identifying locations. I think we have a half a dozen locations. Erin might be able to chime in if she has any additional thoughts, but to answer your question, yes.
Yeah.
additional wells are in the
Nothing,
works.
nothing like in the next year or two, but in the near future. Say 5 years out.
Probably within 5 years.
Thanks.
Hey, Brian, what's the time frame on that 27-inch? Is it going to be in the same footprint that it is right now?
We haven't sorted through all the details of design, which materials to use. That's what we'll be undergoing with engineers. But I think a likely scenario would be a parallel pipeline using the existing easements or right-of-ways. We'll see how that pans out in design.
Yes, Brian, a question. I'm looking at your staff summary report that was attached to our agenda package. And I had a question about one of the items. Just reading briefly, it says in 2023, water production completed the rehabilitation of the Lake Murray water treatment plant backwash tower, restoring a single point of failure used in surface water production for decades to come. Does it remain as a single point of failure, or has it just been refurbished, or can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think that project was a huge success. The interior of the backwash tower was in pretty poor shape with the paint coming off of the structure. For that project, we rehabilitated both the inside and outside of the tank, blasted the inside down to bare metal, brought the entire painting system back up. So it's in great shape now. As far as a single point of failure, yes, it remains a single point of failure. The backwash tower is used primarily to backwash our filters used for surface water production. We were able to bypass the backwash tower or use pumps while that project was undergoing. So if need be, we figured out a workaround during that project, but for the most part, it is a single point of failure for surface water production. But thanks to a good rehabilitation project, it's in great shape.
Does that tank actually contain the backwash from the filters? The backwash water goes into the tanks, and then does it settle then, or what is that process, just briefly?
Other way around, the backwash tank holds treated potable water that's used to then run backwards through the filters to wash the filters at the treatment plant. First, you run air backwards to break up the media, and then you run finished water backwards. So the backwash tower holds about 200,000 gallons. Backwash takes about 50,000 gallons, so it holds basically 4 filters worth of water to run backwards through the filter to run off or to wash out all of the particulates that have been captured in the dual media filters.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, one more, just to understand kind of the management structure in your group. In your report, you did comment on the reclaimed water tanks or storage tank at Buffalo Park. Do you have, are you the one with authority over the reclaimed water system, or does that lie elsewhere?
I wouldn't say so. I'm the water production manager. I mainly look over the water production sources, springs wells, Upper Lake Mary treatment plants for potable water. I'm not really in charge of the reclaim system or the infrastructure. The Buffalo Park tank was added a little late. I had been working on the potable water storage tanks, and we added the Buffalo Park tank because it just made sense.
Got it. Sounds good. Thank you.
Well, thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah, thank you, Brad. That was great. Okay, we'll move to 5B, Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement. Aaron Young and Lee Story.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Aaron Young, Water Resources Manager. It's really hard not to be there in person today for some big presentations from our team. And we'll ask Lee to kick it off, and then I'll introduce the rest of the team who are online today to talk about the Red Gap Ranch pipeline project. But Lee has a really important update that we thought you'd want to have the latest information on. Lee, are you prepared to share your screen, or would you like us to share your presentation?
Actually, Erin, if you could do it, that would be fantastic. And greetings, everyone. It's nice to be able to speak to you this afternoon. It's been a long awaited opportunity to get to you today. And I am very, very pleased to kind of update you on the water rights settlement agreement between the Navajo Nation, the Hopi tribe, the San Juan Southern Paiute tribe, and a variety of other parties, including the city of Flagstaff. And it looks like Erin is getting the PowerPoint up to help better understand some of these terms. It's a monumental achievement. And I have to tell you that every single party that has approved this settlement agreement to date has done so unanimously. And it's a testament to the commitments to the region and to resolve the water rights claims of the Navajo Nation, the Hopi tribe, and the San Juan Southern Paiute. So if you want to flip through that, Erin, that would be great.
You bet.
Can you go?
Lee, and if I could interrupt real quick,
Sure.
I don't, you've been working for Flagstaff for decades. You are an amazing asset to the city. You have been for many, many years. The commissioners haven't met you, or many of them haven't. Would you mind providing just a brief history and an introduction before you get going?
Certainly. Thank you very much. I'm Lee Story, and I'm with the TSL Law Group. I started working for the city of Flagstaff. I think my earliest emails go back to 1994. And at the time, Mayor Babasi was facilitating the Navajo Hopi Land Settlement Act that was passed in 1996. And so I've assisted the city on water resources matters since that time, planning issues, development issues, policy issues, consulting, and also in the general stream adjudications. And as part of that, with the Little Colorado River general stream adjudication, we had attempted to get to settlement several times. So this is our furthest achievement so far. It's not done, you will see when I explain the process, but there has been an agreement that's been drafted, approved, and legislation has been introduced in Congress. So we're very excited about that because settlement is so much better than protracted litigation. So that's my long history. I'm not sure if there was anything else I needed to say, but it's a pleasure to and an honor to be able to assist the city on water matters. Always has been. So thank you. And I'll just get right into it. It's a significant document. It's massive in its size, and it includes many exhibits. But again, it resolves water rights claims. If you've been following, there's been significant litigation with the tribes since 2014, both with the Hopi tribe and then with the Navajo Nation. And we completed last year one phase of the Navajo Nation claims. And everyone, the Navajo and the parties, essentially back in November of last year said, can we take a break and think about whether or not settlement will work? So we did, and this is the result of all of that work by a lot of parties. So what it does is, at least for the city of Flagstaff, it resolves some of the objections to the city's surface water rights among the parties to the agreement, and it allows for pumping from the city's existing wells at Red Gap Ranch. Also allows for the city to be able to commingle water supplies in Lake Mary, should that option be chosen by the city in the future. So there are, I'll go through the other benefits to the Navajo Nation, Hopi Tribe, San Juan Southern Paiute. But you can see on the screen the number of parties. There are 39 parties. 30 of them trigger the what is called the effective date. Right now, we don't have 30 that have signed yet because it's a process. But it's coming along. So if you go to the next slide, Aaron. So as I said, we're all very excited about this because the approvals so far have been unanimous. The Hopi tribe was the first to approve on the 20th of May. Navajo Nation and San Juan Southern Paiute followed a couple of days later. And then the Central Arizona Water Conservation District, also a party to the settlement, approved it. And then the Salt River Project did as well. CAWCD is involved because there is water that is part of the settlement agreement from the upper basin off the Colorado River. Very valuable component of this settlement agreement for the benefit of the Navajo Nation and the Hopi tribe. And then Flagstaff approved the settlement on July 2nd, so recently. And then there are other parties that are going through the process of bringing it before other towns and communities to get those approvals moving forward. So that's where we are. Legislation was introduced bipartisan. We do have a Senate bill that was introduced by Senator Kelly and co-sponsored by Senator Sinema, and that's Senate Bill 4633. There's not been a committee meeting for the legislation yet. The House bill should be HB 8940. That was introduced by Representative Siscomani, and it is co-sponsored by Representatives Crane, Schweikert, Grijalva, and Stanton. So there will be a hearing next Tuesday in the Natural Resources Committee on the House side. As I said, the Senate side has not yet scheduled it. So part of the process is that you cannot have a water rights settlement agreement affecting a tribe without having it approved by Congress. So we're going through that process as well. So this was yesterday, actually. I'm very happy to say Flagstaff was able to participate in a signing ceremony with the 3 tribes, CAWCD and SRP. And yes, Aaron is pointing out a couple of the only important, the people on the front level. The rest of us were support staff who helped bring the settlement to bear. But this was a momentous event that happened yesterday morning at the Heard Museum. There's been quite a bit of press about it. The remarkable thing is that it involves 3 tribes on a unified front, and it's very exciting for that reason and historic. So if you go to the next one, thank you. These are again, just the first steps. It took a lot to get here, but there's still a long way to go. The settlement agreement, there are some exhibits that still need to be conformed. There are other parties that still need to sign. We have to get an act passed by Congress approving the settlement and funding to authorize water supply projects, which I'll talk about a little bit further. And then once you have an act of Congress approving the settlement agreement, whatever Congress says, you have to abide by it. So then we go back to the settlement agreement, that 265-page document with all of the exhibits, and we conform it to what Congress says will happen. So that's the next step, and then all the parties will re-execute that revised document to make it consistent with the act. Then we also have to get the adjudication courts to approve it, because the Navajo Nation also has land in the Verde River subbasin of the Gila River adjudication. We have to get the settlement approved not only in the Little Colorado River adjudication and found binding on all the parties to the adjudication. The same will happen in the Gila for purposes of the Navajo Ranch there. I didn't spell adjudication correctly, but one more A. We should have A pluses throughout all of this. But in any event, that's another step. And then enforceability begins. So the document will be effective when 30 parties sign and we move forward with the process. It becomes enforceable as against all the parties once the courts approve, the Congress approves money for the projects, and then we go through the implementation of the act. So, which with the construction of various water supply projects can take quite a bit of time. So that's the process, but we are right at, even though a lot of work has gone in to get to this point, we're still at the very beginning of the process. Thank you, Erin. So just to give you a highlight of what the tribes will receive under the settlement agreement is that, and it's basically the same for Navajo, Hopi, and the San Juan Southern Paiute with respect to their right to store water, use groundwater on their own reservation lands, and having the right to use effluent as well. But for the Navajo Nation, it also recognizes a certain amount of water that is generally available on the Little Colorado River main stem, and that amount is 122,000 acre-feet a year. It's not guaranteed, of course, because nature will decide what will happen, but that is the average expectation. It also recognizes the springs, Navajo farms, and current acreage, and that's the same for the Hopi tribe. But in particular, and this is the most valuable component or a valuable component in this entire settlement, and that is the 44,700 acre-feet a year of upper basin Colorado River water. This is a early priority right and very valuable during times of shortage. And even more so than the lower basin Colorado River water, which has a fourth priority. Still good, but fourth priority. And that they're going to have 3,500 acre-feet a year. They can lease that, they can recharge it in aquifers in Arizona and generate credits to market those if they choose to do so. And then Hopi tribe gave the Navajo Nation a small portion of their own water from Cibola. They have a ranch in the lower basin, and the Hopi gave the Navajo that, and the Navajo in exchange gave the Hopi tribe a portion of the upper basin Colorado River water. And that's essential for one of the water supply projects that are planned to take water from Lake Powell. And I mentioned the Big Boquillas Ranch in the Verde for Navajo. So if you go to the next one, the difference with the Hopi tribe is that their upper basin water allocation is 2,300 acre feet a year. They do have the majority of the lower basin Cibola water, which is 4,178 acre feet a year. And then there's some lower priority water that's associated with that, but they're subject to basically shortages on the Colorado River. The value of those, they're not as usable as the others. But there's also an agreement between Navajo, the Hopi tribe, State Land Department, and Bar T Bar for an area at Hart Ranch where they agree to pumping limitations that are immediately adjacent to the Navajo reservation. So those are all good benefits for the Hopi tribe. And then what the San Juan Southern Paiute gets, you can go to the next slide, is they get to have their reservation finally approved. They've been living as sort of as an in-holding for centuries, but right inside the Navajo reservation, and there is a treaty between the Navajo Nation and San Juan Southern Paiute that never got approved by Congress, but it will be approved in this agreement, and it will provide the San Juan Southern Paiute with 5,400 acres of land. And they have similar rights with respect to what they can do on that land. But what is particularly helpful here is that NTUA, which is the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, they serve and have water projects throughout the Navajo reservation, and they will extend their water lines to serve them. There's an allocation of about 350 acre feet a year out of the Navajo Nation's water, and they will send that to San Juan Southern Paiute. So part of the funding for various projects includes the extension of water lines for NTUA to serve the San Juan Southern Paiute. There's also a very notable intertribal groundwater management plan, particularly related to the 5 northern washes that start on the Navajo reservation, run through the Hopi reservation, and then back to the Navajo reservation before reaching the Little Colorado River. There's historic agricultural rights there, cattle, springs, sacred springs. All of those are addressed between Navajo and Hopi on how to manage that, along with groundwater pumping from the Inn Aquifer. There's been a long dispute between Navajo and Hopi as to how that groundwater should be utilized. And it's one of the highest qualities of groundwater in the region. It has a TDS, I believe, of about 150. So it's very good drinking water. And so in some of our prior settlements, having this intertribal management plan, the Navajo and the Hopi were not able to bring that to closure, but they have. And so that's very exciting to see. So on the next slide, I will describe, I'll first tell you about surface water rights for all parties to the agreement are protected. The city's reservoirs are protected. Lake Mary, Upper Lake Mary, Lower Lake Mary, And that's for all parties to the settlement. There will be no new irrigation, however, from direct diversions from a stream. So those waters that flow towards the Navajo reservation are anticipated to continue. Everything else is grandfathered in if you have a surface water right like that. But the idea is to ensure that those flows and expectations of those flows will continue. But with respect to groundwater, and this is important for the city of Flagstaff, is that there are 2 buffer zones that are created. One buffer zone extends essentially 2 sections around the boundary of the Navajo reservation. So for Red Gap, it's 2 miles south from the Navajo reservation. And this boundary that goes around extends all the way to the New Mexico border. So there's a buffer zone 1 that's about 2 miles wide. Then there's buffer zone 2 that goes from 2 miles to about 6 miles or 6 sections south of or west of the reservation. So it also extends all the way to the New Mexico border. And this is important because wells in those zones have certain pumping restrictions. And all but one parcel of Red Gap Ranch lies within those 2 buffer zones. But the agreement allows for wells, existing wells, to be recognized and pumping based on their capacity, or there's a chart that's crafted in what you'll see, table 9.4.1, which limits the capacity based on the size of the well. If it's a 6-inch versus 8 versus 10 versus 12, 14 or more, and that allows the Department of Water Resources to go out, which they're required to do once the act is passed, to go and catalog all of the wells in buffer zone 1 and in buffer zone 2. There are some restrictions on replacement wells. For example, in buffer zone 1, no new wells can be drilled. You can replace them, but no new wells can be drilled. And in buffer zone 2, you can replace them. New well can be drilled, but there's certain requirements with respect to new wells that are drilled. Outside buffer zone 2, or 6 miles south of the reservation, there's no restrictions whatsoever on the pumping. So for the city of Flagstaff, within buffer zone 1, there are 11 wells that have a capacity under this cataloging system of 2,912 acre feet a year. And in buffer zone 2, there are 16 wells with a capacity of 15,803 acre feet a year. But if certain wells are replaced, it's possible to utilize more water if it's needed, up to 19,003 acre feet a year. Outside of buffer zone 2, again, there's no limit. The city does have 1 well outside buffer zone 2 on that one parcel that I was describing earlier on. And this is important because it's enough water to manage the Red Gap Ranch project, which was discussed a lot in settlement negotiations. So if we go to the next slide, Aaron, I think this might describe, it does, the projects. So maybe you've read in the paper that these projects amount to $5 billion for the Navajo Nation, the Hopi tribe, in the San Juan Southern Paiute Tribe. And this is sort of the breakdown. Now, this still is being um, uh, looked at, of course, will be in Congress, but the Inibapa to Akatsi, if I pronounced it correctly, you may recall as the Western Navajo Pipeline. This is named, it means water is life, water is sacred. And it would take that upper basin Colorado River water that we've talked about and deliver it down even almost as far as Cameron one day and then over to Gray Mountain potentially. But it would also have an important spur off of that to take water to the Hopi tribe at Moenkopi. So that's one of the significant costs. There are other pipeline projects, quite a few of them, both on the Navajo reservation, on extending water from New Mexico through the Navajo Gallup water supply project to other communities on the Navajo reservation. It allows for groundwater pumping projects for the Hopi tribe as well. And I did mention the San Juan Southern Paiute. So the other pipeline and well projects amount to these numbers here: 2.4 billion for the Navajo, 390 million for the Hopi tribe, and 42 million for the San Juan Southern Paiute. There are other kinds of costs associated with a project, with the request in the legislation that was introduced on July 8th on the Senate and the House side. And that relates to agricultural projects, water management projects, some rehabilitation projects, and they amount to so the total amount for the requested Navajo, Hopi, San Juan Southern Paiute water supply projects amounts to $5 billion. Admittedly, that's a large amount, and but more and more we know, Flagstaff, we know how expensive water supply projects are because you have to take them from a distance. The access to the groundwater supplies and water quality are big concerns. So that's how these were totaled up. And if you go to the next slide, Aaron, this will kind of show you, I have to put my glasses on. This is a Navajo Nation map that was prepared to sort of outline the areas where the water supply projects will be. You'll see some that will bring basically furthering for the Navajo Nation, the water supply infrastructure already being constructed under the Navajo Gallup Water Supply Project. And then also from the Utah settlement, bringing water down to Kayenta. So the Navajo Nation is the largest land nation. I mean, it's massive in its size. They're big projects, but the sources of supply are in these areas. Certain infrastructure is already provided for in other settlement agreements. So it allows the Navajo Nation to extend those pipeline projects to serve other chapters on the Navajo reservation. You will see also the Hopi Hamp project, which is a groundwater supply project, will be meaningfully upgraded and extended to serve the villages. And then that you will see on the left-hand side here, the one that's coming down from Lake Powell. It's basically furthering what was the Western Navajo Pipeline project. So there's also, I will point out to you, down at the very bottom, you will see bottom left-hand corner closest to where Red Gap is, you'll see the Southwest Navajo Regional Groundwater Project. There will be some improvements on that one. It's already under construction by work with the Bureau of Reclamation, and it will be extended out to serve other communities off of that project. And if you look even more closely, there are some lines down at the bottom where discussions are that would allow the Navajo Nation to come down to Red Gap Branch and tie into the Red Gap Regional Pipeline Project. And that's because of several key reasons. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about those. So the Red Gap project is very much a component of the water settlement agreement. And that is because there is an interest in having access to the project. Navajo Nation, Hopi Tribe, State Land Department. There was a great deal of discussion about the Twin Arrows intersection and other intersections along the ADOT, the I-40, Interstate 40 corridor. And the reasons are pretty basic and very important to recognize. And the water quality, though not great at Red Gap compared to the city's stellar water quality, right? It's still better than a lot of other groundwater in the sea aquifer in and around Red Gap Ranch. And if you go north towards Loop on the Navajo Reservation, water quality there is quite bad. TDS levels well over 10,000. At Red Gap, I believe it's 600 to 800 TDS levels. So the water quality is much better at Red Gap Ranch. So there's a reason for the Navajo Nation to want to come south. There's also, there are, water supply to have supplemental supplies for the Navajo Nation. Down in that southwestern portion of the Navajo Reservation, also there are areas that are difficult for NTUA, their water authority, to adequately serve because they can, but it's more feasible to tie into Red Gap, or it's potentially more feasible for them to do that than to build over canyons. To do a pipeline over a canyon, it's better to have access to the project and serve some of those areas north of Red Gap Ranch on the Navajo Reservation. There are also a lot of interest, again, with respect to the ADOT rights of way. So part of the settlement negotiation ultimately allowed for this city to ask Jacobs Engineering and talk through these planning sessions as to where those locations might be and to get direction from ADOT, and then to also cost out what that would be to create a turnout in those locations. Another interested party, because both Navajo and Hopi were interested in accessing the project at Twin Arrows. And then also the same with the Arizona State Land Department in that area, because they have some land right near those interchanges that might be used for commercial purposes. So in any event, we spent quite a bit of time doing that. And if you go to the next page, there are some key terms in the settlement agreement. One is a point of access, which is one or more location where Flagstaff provides access to the water delivered from the regional project. It would be at ADOT interchanges along I-40, or possibly on Red Gap Ranch itself if it's mutually beneficial to the city and the Navajo Nation to take at that location. The regional project essentially means the project, right? That's owned and operated by the city. It includes the storage facilities, treatment facilities, points of access necessary, whatever is necessary, all that infrastructure that is necessary for the city to withdraw and deliver water from Red Gap Ranch and any of these, points of access for municipal use. So it's not for an intended agricultural use by any of the tribes. It's intended for municipal uses. And then water supply contract basically would be in the future, whatever is required to recover the cost for the project and to serve, schedule, maintenance, whatever might be required in the ordinary course. And so it's not laid out in specificity as to what that would be because but it essentially means to cover the cost associated with the delivery of any water to any customer of the project. So if you go to the next slide, the city council reviewed and approved enthusiastically and unanimously on July 2nd. And they did so even though the Red Gap Ranch project, though identified and has these regional benefits, the act does not provide for funding for the Red Gap water supply project. It provides funding for all of those Navajo, Hopi, and San Juan Southern Paiute projects. But given its size of the request of Congress, it does not include funding for the regional water supply project. So the city's direction, direction is to support the water infrastructure needs of the tribes, of course. But council directed staff to seek funding for the regional project from available sources, including NORSA, the act. So that's lobbying beyond my what do you say, beyond my skill set, but that is where the direction came. And I will just have one more slide because this was the day that the city did approve the settlement. We didn't get everybody who was online there, but that was on July 2nd. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we have a couple questions, so go ahead. Who would like to go first?
Commissioner Bain,
No, I was deferring to you.
I'd defer you.
Yeah, this is hard. This is huge, and congratulations on a massive agreement and a lot to swallow or a lot to comprehend, I should say, for those of us who haven't been closely involved with it. I assume, since this is a Flagstaff Water Commission, the part that most directly affects Flagstaff itself is this Red Gap Ranch Regional Pipeline Project. Does anything in the discussions or council direction obligate Flagstaff to actually develop that for municipal water for the city of Flagstaff?
No. I think it is wisely understood that if there's an opportunity to obtain federal funding for a water supply project in the region, it's now. And so direction was to seek that opportunity. But you know, you never know what could happen, how, you know, what might be provided, what might not be provided, but no.
Does anything in the agreement prohibit the city from developing the water for sale to the tribes, either in addition to or instead of its own use?
No. The city can do that.
Thank you.
A question, but they get an allocation for free, correct?
Are you talking about water from the Red Gap project or their water allocation based on their federal reserved rights? So
I
there's,
guess I'm talking, I guess, about Red Gap Ranch because the paper said, oh, gotta trust the paper, everything you read, right? The paper said they get so many acre feet as part of the agreement, free. I mean, yeah, free from the city if we develop Red Gap.
currently under this settlement agreement, there's no allocation amount that's specified, so it'll be mutually beneficial as to what that might be.
So I'm sorry, one more follow-up then on that. So you say mutually agreed to, so the city is not obligated to provide water to any of the tribes? Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair. You could say that. But if it's a regional project that is developed, you would think the interest in it is financial for Navajo and Hopi, right? Because access to the project is likely much more viable than drilling their own wells, self-serving those wells on any of their particular lands. Treating that water.
Any other questions?
I see
and this is-
Commissioner Bills has his hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. I just have a general comment to begin with, and I really have to say that I got to appreciate all the time and effort put in by the group of people that have stuck with this particular water rights settlement over the decades, literally decades, that it's taken to get to this point. I remember when I moved out here in 1978 to start working for the U.S. Geological Survey, I was made aware of an adjudication process that was already in progress for the Little Colorado River Basin. And just, it always amazes me that, you know, in this particular case, something like this would have taken as long as it has. Secondly, a follow-up to the previous questions. I believe the city of Flagstaff had a pre-existing agreement with the Navajo Nation to pump up to certain amounts of water from within Zone 1 and Zone 2 of the of those areas south of the reservation boundary. And I'm not sure that I heard that that was included as part of the existing agreement or not. And then I have one more question after that. I'll let you go ahead and respond to this first.
Thank you, and nice to hear your voice again, Mr. Bills. So you may be thinking of some negotiated amounts for the Navajo Nation. They were interested in taking 1,000 acre feet a year from off the Red Gap Ranch Pipeline Project. The Hopi tribe, 500 acre feet a year off the Red Gap Ranch Project. It doesn't mention either of those as a limit now, and it could be more.
What I was thinking
If
about
it's mutually
specifically,
agreeable.
what I was
Right.
thinking about specifically was the amount of water that the city of Flagstaff would be allowed to pump from either zone 1 or zone 2 for its own use out of the Red Gap Ranch?
That's the reason that I put on the one of the slides to talk about the amount from the city's existing wells at Red Gap Ranch under the settlement agreement in buffer zone 1. The city, it's about 2,900 acre feet a year. In buffer zone 2, it's about 15,000 acre feet a year. And then outside buffer zone 2, there's no limit.
Okay, so those are basically groundwater or grandfathered amounts.
That's correct. And yes, that's correct. And the operative thing is the project itself. How is it going to be designed and how much water is needed?
Okay, so my last question has to do with, potential development along the I-40 corridor, uh, either in zone 1, probably more than likely in zone 2, or just south of the buffer zones on the Navajo Nation. Right now, if there is going to be any significant development in those rural parts of the state of northern Arizona, they will be required to file either a 100-year water supply or an assured water supply report with ADWR. And I'm wondering whether or not ADWR potential developers are aware of the fact that there are limits along that corridor to how much water they can actually pump out of the ground over time.
The Department of Water Resources will be charged with notifying anyone who drills a new well in the buffer zone about the settlement agreement and what the limits are in the settlement agreement. If a party chooses to ignore that, if a pumper, a well driller decides they don't care and they want to drill a massive well immediately adjacent to the Navajo reservation, or the Hopi Heart Ranch, those parties, well, the Navajo Nation can object to that well.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your talk. It's really added a lot more understanding for me to this whole process, and I really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Lee, this is Kurt. I know we're talking about Congress. Given how long it's taken to get to here, do you think having this be enforceable and actually underway as a vehicle is a 5-year task, a 10-year task, a 15? What, just sort of a ballpark? If everybody was working together, let's put it that way.
Well, I think everyone is working together. It's a question of what Congress will be willing to do. How much are they going to put towards all of these projects? It could be all of it. And we get this through by the end of the year. That's still a possibility. But if it goes over into other administrations, that may happen. But while those ongoing efforts could happen over a year or period of years, you have to keep in mind that we have also stayed the litigation. So we're not going to be fighting with our neighbors any longer. We will stay that very costly and protracted litigation that allows the parties to continue to move forward step by step on the settlement agreement for however long it takes. So I think we're all arm in arm on this, and it may take time. It will take time for that to happen, but in the meantime, we won't have to litigate over their claims.
Understood. Thank you.
Rabin?
Go ahead, Kurt, if you had another question.
No, I was just going to ask if there's any other questions.
Oh,
Okay, we're doing tag team here. I nodded to John here. Thank you. I guess this is a question primarily directed to Council Member Sweet and Director Jones. Does the fact that the council directed staff to seek funding for the Red Gap Ranch development, does that actually constitute was there a sense that that's a decision that if the money could be found, that you would in fact go ahead with that? Or is that just a necessary but not sufficient condition to proceed with that kind of development? I ask this because, as you very well know, there have been lots of discussions about whether Red Gap Ranch is a smart development for Flagstaff versus other technology options. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Vane. So the direction is to seek that funding through, as they mentioned, through applying for grants, through our lobbyists. The decision points for the council would be is if and when that funding became available, council would have to make a decision of whether to accept that funding. And I think there would probably be multiple lenses that they would look through. What's the level of funding? Is it a phasing approach to continue to progress forward? What is that amount? If there's cost matching, does the city have the ability to fulfill its commitment? So I think there'll be multiple decision points. The direction and the process forward would be to begin to solicit and seek for those funding opportunities to bring those before council for discussion and decisions on what they would do with that.
Thank you. And I do agree. I think at this point, we are just trying to keep all options open. And that was the direction at that point.
I see. Thank you. A follow-up and related question then. In the past, when we've had questions about, the engineering projects and the cost estimates for Red Gap Ranch, actually for quite a few years, we've been told that information can't be shared because of outstanding litigation. Does this agreement now bring that to an end? And is it going to be possible to share more fully the engineering analysis of the Red Gap Ranch project?
That is
Mr.
the
Chair.
next presentation.
That's why we're here today.
Great. Thank you.
Way to tee it up.
Commissioner
Commissioner
Alder?
Vane.
I have one follow-up question on all this. $5 billion is a big price tag. So I don't know much about the federal government, but I assume that's taxpayer dollars that Congress would have to allocate for all these projects. But it seems like the water rights agreements portion, not including the financial aspect, but just to say who has what water rights and that kind of thing, are important as well. Assuming that's correct, can that portion move forward without federal funding of $5 billion? The two aren't tied together, are they? Can we move forward, or Congress move forward with just the water rights section without the $5 billion?
Congress can act. And Congress can say we're going to fund all of it. Congress can say we're going to fund a portion of it. Congress can say we're not going to, but we're going to approve the act. It would be an injustice, however, I think, if funding was not supplied to get real wet water to the Navajo Nation, the Hopi tribe, and San Juan Southern Paiute. So I would highly doubt that, there won't be a funding component. I think there most assuredly will be a funding component, but Congress has to decide what that is.
Thank you.
John Nauman here. I have a couple questions. I was just looking at the volumes of water in Zone 1 and Zone 2. If I calculate we're talking about 22,000 acre feet of water a year. Maybe Commissioner Bills could make a comment on this. I've read some stuff that we have decreasing water tables up on the rim right now already. And I'm wondering what the long-term consequences of, we couldn't commit all that water, to using all that water, I think. And how would that decision-making process proceed to make those commitments? And would they be based on limited timeframes or permanent timeframes? How would that all work?
Might I respond to that first? I just put those numbers up there. So this is a legal entitlement. Doesn't necessarily mean that that is what the city will choose to use for purposes of the Red Gap Branch project.
Oh, this is Don. I don't think I can add too much more to that without looking at it a little more closely. I do know that the city and others have both done some extensive modeling work on what the impacts of groundwater withdrawals up to those amounts would look like, what kind of impact they would have on that area. So it, I just couldn't really tell you one way or the other.
Yeah, the other question I would have is over time, how would they affect the salinity of the water over time? I think those are factors that should be taken into account before long-term decisions are made. Yeah, I'm waiting to hear the next presentation. I've been waiting for this for a few years.
That is something I can maybe add a little perspective on. I was involved in doing the aquifer tests for the 3 sea aquifer wells on the reservation side that were originally intended as a source of water supply for south and western communities along the reservation. Each one of those aquifer tests ran for a minimum of 72 hours. And the 3 production wells were spread out along that same a parallel line coincident with Interstate 40 and the reservation boundary. And in the case of the pumping test at Site 1, which was right next to Canyon Diablo, there was no change in the water quality throughout that 72-hour test. In the case of the pumping test at site, or the aquifer test at Site 2, which is about halfway in between, halfway along that line from Canyon Diablo, moving east toward the Loop Road. Again, during that 72-hour aquifer test, there was no change in the water chemistry. At Site 3, which is the one furthest east, the one closest to Loop Road and the Little Colorado River, right toward the end of the 72-hour aquifer test, I started seeing an increase in the specific conductance, essentially equivalent to total dissolved solid content in the water. And it was enough to convince the parties involved, the Navajo Nation, Bear Reclamation, and the USGS, to extend that aquifer test for another 24 hours. Unfortunately, the generator that we were using to run the pump failed. So at that point, given the amount of time that will be needed to allow the wells at that particular site to recover their pre-static condition, it was deemed not worthwhile to try and pursue that particular issue. And I don't know, because of the Red Gap Ranch wells are a little bit further south and to the east, whether or not the pumping tests or the aquifer tests they've done on Red Gap Ranch, the city has done on Red Gap Ranch, have seen significantly different results than what we saw with those loop well-filled wells. So I'll let it go at that. I'm interested in the next topic too.
Thank you.
Any further questions before we Move into our next topic, which is 5C. So, okay, seeing none, let's go to 5C, Red Gap Branch Water Pipeline Feasibility Study.
Thank you, everyone.
Drum roll, please. Yes, Lee, thank you so much for your support and decades of effort. Eesh. Okay, Aaron, so it's Aaron and Jacobs Engineering to talk about the feasibility study.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Riegelman. When we originally put this slideshow together, it was 2 months ago. Actually, it was probably a year ago. But as Mr. Vane alluded to, we're just in the settlement process where we weren't able to release this information. We were prepared to introduce a team. I'm going to shortcut that. We have Brad Hill on the team. We have Kevin Black. Kevin has decades of experience with the Bureau of Reclamation. The Bureau of Reclamation process for evaluating a project such as Red Gap does include an analysis of need for a community. So to Mr. Vane's point, we do have other water resources available for Flagstaff, for example. But Kevin is on our team, and we can do introduction maybe at the next meeting, just because I want to give maximum time to Jacobs to present their engineering work. I was prepared and let's see, Jacobs, I can't see who's at the podium, if that's Jeff or Doug, but if you want to bring up your slides, go ahead. I was prepared with maybe 5 slides at the beginning to frame where Red Gap Ranch fits into the picture for Flagstaff and the calculations that lead to our build out water demands. We can talk about that at another meeting. And I propose we just fast forward to Doug, to your engineering slides on the pipeline project. I know the commission typically they're out at 6. So with the settlement being so fast moving in the last month, we wanted to give Lee time to provide that update to the commission. So I'll forgo my slides if that's okay with you, Doug.
Sure, it's okay with me.
Okay. I just probably did a lot of talking there that I didn't need to do, but why don't you go ahead and fast forward to your slides?
Right, will do.
Okay.
So, hi Commissioners, Doug Smith here with Jacobs Engineering. Jeff Miner's here with me. Here's our project manager. I'm the senior engineer on the project. Jeff and I are just celebrating 16 years on the project. So, it's a long story to tell. I will, first of all, fast forward. Here's the purpose need thing that Aaron was going to do. So we're going to, like Aaron said, save that for a future reference for you. And so here we go on history. Now, what I want to do is give you the historical timeline so you can see all what we've been through, so things don't need to be redone in that regard. And then I'll quickly go through a lot of the technical details. Now, I've got about a half an hour of speaking here. Feel free to interrupt me. And then just be conscious of time, but I will try to get everything to you in half an hour here. So on the timeline, you can see from 2008 all the way to this year, a lot of the work that's been done. It's been really a tenacious path to be able to work through some of the blocks and things to be able to create a viable project with a good alignment. You can see there's some key pivot points in there. One of them is where we had to stop work in 2010 after phase 1 to find a new right-of-way, a way to get through. And then also in 2016, where the IGA, the intergovernmental agreement with ADOT, was signed, which led us to go ahead and proceed with the phase 2 study, which we've just now completed, and we have the draft report available. And so now available to the staff, I should say. It is in draft form. And so we had to do some more work in segment 3 as a result of that. So I want to detail that for you just a little bit. First of all, segment nomenclature. Segment 1 was from Red Gap until we get to around Twin Arrows. Segment 2, Twin Arrows to Winona. Segment 3, Winona into the city limits. And so within those segments, we defined 3 major potential right-of-way corridors. And this goes all the way back to the beginning in 2008 and 9, where we looked at following
the railroad alignment, the APS power line alignment, or the I-40 frontage. And all those were going to require easements to be able to get through there because there wasn't room or would not be allowed to be within any of those rights of way to be able to establish the pipeline. Then when we got into segment 2, we generally would be following the I-40 frontage. And then we got into segment 3, we were in Townsend Winona Road, and then following Turkey Hills on into the city. So there is the alignment from April 2009 that was presented to the Water Commission, the City Council, and the public. And so that is what we move forward with. But we ran into right-of-way problems at that time because of the Hopi ASLD checkerboard in there. So we took a step back and said, is there another way through here? And again, the note there that we assume we would be adjacent to an existing right-of-way. So we looked at going way south and coming around up into Lake Mary with the pipeline, but we found it was a major increase in capital costs and also a higher elevation to pump to be able to get over the mountains at that point. So we set it aside and said, this just isn't feasible. So now we're to 2011. And so what can we do? Well, the only other alternative at this point was to go to ADOT and say, please let us get in within your right of way with the pipeline. So we did that. And over a period of years, extending all the way to 2016 now, the IGA was developed. Much like the settlement agreement that Lee just told you about, this was monumental to allow us to put this much of the city's pipeline within an ADOT right-of-way. It's rarely done, but we got it done and under certain terms. So again, I changed the note there from the I-40 frontage to actually the I-40 right-of-way because now we're literally inside the fence of I-40. And that's what allowed us to continue working on the project. We then discovered in segment 3, there were some cultural resources that we hadn't accounted for going over Turkey Hills. So we did in 2019 an additional analysis of segment 3, and that resulted in us selecting Townsend Winona Road as the alignment to come all the way into the city from Winona. Which brings us to the alignment that's in the phase 2 study that is now drafted. We followed the I-40 right-of-way alignment within I-40. When we get to Twin Arrows, we essentially switch into the Forest Service adjacent to I-40. And when we get into segment 3 at Winona, we follow the county road all the way in. So just a word about the ADOT coordination because the IGA comes with certain restrictions. First of all, an emergency response plan has to be developed. And what happens if the pipeline breaks, I-40 is interrupted in some way as a transportation facility. So we have to work with ADOT to develop that emergency response plan and then traffic mitigation costs similar to that. On the design criteria side, ADOT gets to provide engineering responses to some standard design criteria that have to be used for the pipeline within the ADOT right-of-way. So that criteria hasn't been finalized, although it is close. There are just a couple of terms that ADOT's consultant needs to review and confirm. One of those issues is minimum cover. So our perspective is 4 feet of cover over the pipeline is enough through that area. ADOT's perspective was their standard is 5 feet of minimum cover. That 1 foot is a huge difference to our excavation and backfill cost for the pipeline. So that has to be settled when we complete the criteria. As far as rights of way, this is something that's been ongoing. So the city team has been continuously trying to acquire right of way. We mentioned how much has shifted. We needed to see if there were barriers in certain area. And so land acquisition has been going and the majority of the ASLD right of way has been acquired. So to drill in a little bit here to segment 1, entirely within the ADOT right-of-way, except for the pump stations. The pump stations do set out of the right-of-way generally at the intersection at Two Guns and Twin Arrows. So those properties still are being discussed as far as acquisition. But within the I-40 right-of-way, and this, part of this you get into American history, which is really makes it fascinating. But One of the things that I didn't know about the establishment of the I-40 right-of-way is that ADOT doesn't own all of the I-40 right-of-way in fee. You would think that that's a public right-of-way, and but it's actually in an easement. And then getting back to the checkerboard, it's only in an easement where it's over state lands. The rest of the areas, it's in fee right-of-way. So the problem became where we're in the checkerboard, even though we're within the ADOT right-of-way, ADOT doesn't have the ability to give the city an easement for a pipeline because they don't own the land. What we did then is we went to state land and we said, could we please get easements for our pipeline? And they said, draw them up. And they're done. So we solved that issue with, again, many people involved in it. So we're still working on the pump station sites, but that part of the right-of-way is set. Segment 2, National Forest. We've talked to the Coconut International Forest. We don't see any issues with them getting the permits to be able to put the pipeline there. In segment 3, we're in the county road. We plan to stay within the public right-of-way for the county road. We don't see an issue there either. So that's our right-of-way situation. Now we'll move into some of the design detail. And I'm going to go pretty fast. Just come back and ask questions as needed, but I'm going to go through the sizing of the pipeline, our recommended pipeline material, some of the geotech information, and show you a typical trench section. So first of all, the capacity. This is important given the discussion that you just had about the settlement agreement, but the initial assumption for the pipeline was to have it carry 12,000 acre feet per year. That was the delivery schedule for that was 7 months, April to the end of October. And you can see some of the data there on the daily flow rates. But again, the 7-month delivery is important to understand. Back when we did phase 1, we did an economic pipe size on what's the correct size, and we came up with 30-inch. We call that an economic pipe size because we looked at the energy required to pump that flow over a pretty extended period, 20 to 30 years, versus the pipe material cost. And we found the right balance point for that. So ultimately, the 30-inch size to deliver 12,000 acre feet per year on a progressive schedule where we started an annual growth of about 168 acre feet per year, 30-inch was the right size economically. So that was key. And then what if we needed to go to 16,000 acre feet per year? You simply add 2 months to your delivery schedule. So now instead of pumping for 7 months continuous, you're going to 9 months continuous. That's the capacity that we've gone with in the report. The pipe material recommendation is welded steel. And here are some of the reasons. It's a resilient material. It's good for high pressure. It's proven. The steel price, we use the term game, but basically we can look at the market. And if we know that we're planning to do the pipeline in the next few years, we can basically get options on the steel material when we think it's a little bit of gambling, but when we think the price is right, we can go ahead and buy the material and secure that at that price because the steel market is up and down quite a bit. It's the lowest risk for the I-40 corridor, as in we can weld the joints, and that's important to ADOT and the security of I-40. Very maintainable for long lifetimes. On the geotech, we did go out and do trench test pits to see what we were looking at, and then we determined the soil composition and resistivity, which tied into our cathodic protection, corrosion prevention for the steel, and so on. So we went out and we did a test pit about every mile, and in many cases, our backhoe got to the refusal point where we just couldn't dig through it anymore. Most of them were like that. Many of them 60, 75% encountered shallow bedrock. So we came back with that information, which we really needed to have a good cost estimate for you. And the results was that generally we have alluvial soil over shallow bedrock throughout the alignment. Soil types typical for northern Arizona, and bedrock generally consisting from east to west, as you come from Red Gap into the city, mudstone, sandstone, limestone, which is the predominant material, and finally, as we get to the top of the mountain, basalt. And of course, that's the hard stuff. So where we have alluvium, we have a rippable situation as far as trenching. We don't have a groundwater situation. We also have a reusable material for backfill. But when we get to bedrock, we get to a situation where we're near the surface of the bedrock. We may have a foot or two that's rippable, whether it's where it's weathered a little bit. But when we get to the competent hard material, that's when we're going to go into the more aggressive trenching, and that may mean blasting. So we have a wide range of conditions, but generally we have bedrock anywhere from half a feet to 10 feet, majority less than 5 feet deep. Our normal trench should be about 7 feet deep, and that assumes that 4-foot minimum cover, which gets back to the important ADOT criteria. So below the bedrock depth, we're going to have to get in some aggressive trenching, and we've included that in our cost estimate. Typical trench sections, these are in the report for rock zone or typical soil trench. Again, those same assumptions about depth. Now, when we got to the big canyons, Padre and Diablo Canyon, we assumed that we could directional drill. We can do that with steel pipe, and that we would be able to get under the canyons that way without disrupting the surface. So that is the basis of the cost estimate, and it's kind of the safe assumption. But there is a chance when you get to final design that you could actually develop pipe bridges over those canyons, just like you would a highway bridge. And we've included some sketches and concepts for that in the report. Putting those pipes on the bridges may be less cost than the directional drilling, but we wanted to give you a conservative cost for the report. It's an opportunity to do some value engineering. Now the pump stations, there are 4 of them assumed. The first one being at Red Gap, pump station B at Two Guns, C is at Twin Arrows, and D is close to the intersection of Townsend Winona Road, where it comes off the highway. You can see the data there on the pump station capacity, and we've got it set up to where we have a tank at each pump station. So we pump from the well field to a tank, pick it up from a pump station, pump to the next tank, and work our way up the mountain that way. A little bit about the electrical supply. So we would have 3 duty pumps. And again, this is full build out capacity with 1 spare slot. So each pump station would have 4 pump station slots with 3 that we filled and 1 spare. Primary power supply, we have talked to APS about that. And you can see some of the information there. Transformers, cost sharing between the city and APS. So what we don't know until APS actually sees the design and a final location is how far they will extend a service line to that. And of course, they have to evaluate how much power they're going to sell at that location. So in the cost estimate, we weren't able to include a cost of the service line to the pump stations, but we know that it's something that has to be addressed. Also, diesel generators at each site because of the criticality nature of the water supply. Solar. We know the city has directives that solar is an important part of these projects. It is possible to use solar for all this pumping power. So we've looked at how much would be needed, 10 megawatts. We cover about 10 acres of land. You have that land at Red Gap. Now, one of the questions we've had is, would you be able to establish a solar array at each of the pump station sites? And that requires more land than we've currently allowed for in the pump station sites because we don't know how the whole power supply situation will work out. What we do know is that we have enough land at Red Gap for all of the power. So that's what we presented in the report. Here's some data on the individual pump station design considerations as far as heads and horsepowers and flow rates, which I won't get into. We will be having variable frequency drives to have variable flow. The pump stations will be vertical turbines, which are typical for this kind of high lift situation. They'll be in cans, which go into the ground, and then the pumps will set into those cans. Proven technology, uniform between pump station common parts. The pump station site looks generally like this sketch. You can see it's got a pneumatic tank for surge. You can see the 4 pumps there that are inside a building. They connect to the tank. The generators are there, and the telemetry in the radio tower. There's a little detail about the tanks. It's a 1.7 million gallon tank. And if you did want to phase the project, that could be broken into a couple of tanks of smaller size. Telemetry is assumed to be by fiber optic, which also allows you to have enough broadband to communicate video signals for security and also for monitoring of the equipment. The backup is radio. And we noted there's a repeater station on Mount Eldon that could be used. And the signals that we'd be communicating, we mentioned flow rates and pressures, and those are key data for us monitoring for leaks, especially for the I-40 corridor. And that's something we talked to ADOT about. If we know what pressure and flow we should be receiving at each set of pump stations, then we're pretty sure that we don't have a leak problem, especially not a major rupture problem in the I-40 corridor. And that
Aaron, can anybody hear me? This is Kurt.
Yeah, I can hear you. I am texting Marion and Shannon right now.
There was a bunch of lightning a second ago, so.
Oh, wow. Hopefully they're all still with us.
In every way.
Big, lot of lightning. Big storm.
Doug is cruising along.
They're not moving on my screen.
No,
Yeah,
it's like
I think-
the feed is locked.
yeah, they probably got a surge on this Wi-Fi or something.
I haven't heard back from Shannon or Marion yet. Consistent lightning.
This is like a baseball game. We're gonna have a lightning hold.
Have to come back for a doubleheader tomorrow.
Aaron,
If you wanted
just
me,
as,
if you wanted me to go too. Yep.
just as an FYI, I have, oh, is he coming back? I have a map of, I'll stop talking.
Brad, sir. Aaron, are we back?
Oh,
We
they're
can hear
back.
somebody. Yeah, we can hear
Okay.
somebody.
Yeah, so we had a lightning strike here, knocked us out for a while, but it sounds like we're
Okay.
back on.
You're
Okay, so
You're soft, but we can hear you.
and now we
so,
can see your screen.
Yep, things are coming back up.
So we're having a discussion about what happens at the intersection of Townsend Winona Road and Highway 89, which would essentially be the end of the Red Gap pipeline. And how does that tie in with the pumping schedule? And so to answer your question, it's variable because one of the things that hasn't been determined is how that water gets blended into the city system. I'm going to get to water quality in a minute, but it's not going to be the same water quality that the city is used to on its other sources. So there does need to be an additional study to figure out how that blends in. And right now we had to make an assumption of where to terminate the pipeline, and that intersection is all we've said about it. So that's what the report says. Control schemes, this is a little bit related to that question, was just pull versus push. A pull system would basically say, what's the demand in the city, and let's bring that up the mountain. A push system basically says, let's set our wells and our pumps at the well field, and let's just push it up the hill on a continuous basis. And then we adjust the water, other water supplies in the city on a diurnal demand basis, whatever's needed. But we always have that much coming up every hour of those 7 months. And then we basically level to that. So push versus pull is yet to be determined. Okay, quickly, the water plant. So the finished water quality desired, this is the basic data that we've measured for Red Gap Ranch. And we're going to compare it to some other sources. You can see Flagstaff wells, Flagstaff surface water, Red Gap Ranch, and we threw Glendale in there just to show you some CAP water as an example. So one thing that jumps out at you is the TDS, which was discussed a lot, is in that range of 500 to 970. Lee mentioned that when she was talking about the TDS level of Red Gap water. And also a concern is sulfates. Now, that those two levels are significantly higher than what the current Red Gap supplies are. So when we were doing the phase 1 study, we asked the city staff, what do you think would be a target for TDS for this water? And the answer was 250. We think that that's a reasonable level that could be blended in and would be acceptable to customers. So that was the assumption that we went with, but how do you get there? Well, we need to drop TDS and sulfate. Conventional treatment won't provide that much reduction, so we need to be thinking about membranes. And membranes will have a brackish waste stream. We'll have to have evaporation ponds or some way of getting rid of the brine. And so the membrane technologies do require also pre-treatment to protect the membrane. So talk about the advantages of membrane versus conventional, but that's the recommendation, and it is more expensive than conventional. Here's a diagram of the process, and basically it just shows us coming off the well field with some pre-treatment into the cartridges, into the RO system, and then getting it ready for into the clear well, and off we go. I think the key thing about this is that these cartridges are phasable. So you don't have to go out and build the water plant all at once, and we'll talk more when we get to the cost estimate. The location is also not identified in the report because there are several considerations that have to be taken into account. The footprint and the land that's available, where the brine disposal, if it's evaporation ponds, where can those be established? The potential customers along the pipeline. And when we wrote this report, we didn't even know what was going to happen in the settlement. But if you do have water customers along the pipeline that don't need the water treated at that level, well, then you would probably want the water plant closer to the city, where your customers would want the RO water. So the current study assumes that the plant goes at Red Gap Ranch, but the location doesn't affect the cost at this point. It is a final design determination. Quickly, what we've done on environmental, and I'm going to show you this just to show the scope of what we've done and that it's not going to be a problem. That's the overall message there, is we looked at all the different overarching codes and policies. We looked at biological and archaeological resources. We did all the research on the databases. We looked at wetlands. And then we established future steps, which is basically we need to continue environmental archaeological investigations for mitigation as needed. We need to engage the Bureau to begin coordination with them if they're going to be a participant in the project, and then establish rapport with other agencies. Quickly, what we've done on public outreach. So since the phase 1 process would include, as I said, Water Commission, City Council, public meeting, we're now ready to start a more broad public outreach with this information. Of course, today is really the start of that. The city staff is planning for a city council briefing, which Jeff and I would participate in once again. And that is possibly September, whenever that can be scheduled. Then there is a public comment meeting, which could be associated with the city council, or it could be something separate. Then we need to get the Bureau engaged and And Aaron, I know we have some ideas about specific ways to do that. I don't know if you want to talk to that right now, but we need to do that. And then the Coconino Plateau Water Advisory Council has always been a part of the project and understanding what's happening. So we could go meet with them as well. Okay, here you go. Cost opinion. This is it. Okay. So the pipeline and pump station are estimated at about 323 million. That is in 2023 dollars. The treatment plant component, which is membrane, is about 99 million. So right now, the scope of the project is about 422 million, pipeline, pumps, and treatment. Now, this is a full phase project, 2023 dollars. It's a level 4 cost estimate, which is based on a 10% design. And as such, we've included a 20% contingency in the total number. It's not an addition. It's loaded into the 422. The 20% is for things that this level of design we can't anticipate. So we just need to have a contingency category for it. One example would be the steel market. Like what's actually going to happen to steel by the time you get there. As I mentioned before, the overhead power is not included. The well field and collection system, Red Gap, is not included. Our scope is only to start from the beginning pump station at Red Gap and take it into the city. So that's not, hasn't been costed. And if you want with solar power, that's not included. Again, there's no phasing in this number. It's a full build. So what could you phase if you wanted to? You could have smaller tanks at the pump stations and build those smaller. You can only put in 2 pumps instead of 4 at the pump station to only do a smaller amount of flow as an interim level. And of course, you could pull way back on the level of treatment and only do a certain number of cartridges of those membrane facilities. So the water plant is easily staged and phased. There's no blending considered. We talked about blending, but if, let's say, something happened in the settlement agreement where it was agreed to just chlorinate well water and bring it all the way up into the city. Now we're talking with a lower quality of water than what we had in this, but if it were blended, what would happen? Would it work? That's something that could be studied more to see if there's any potential for not doing membrane treatment at all for a period of time. So there's some things you heard in the settlement agreement that additional phasing could be important. The points of delivery are not included in the cost estimate, but that was mentioned in the settlement agreement that something maybe at Twin Arrows or other places along the alignment, points of delivery could be part of the project, an important part. And of course, as I mentioned, reduced water treatment. Okay, so schedule. I mentioned the briefings that would continue into September. We'd then complete the phase 2 report. And then really from that point on, after the city council briefing, think about some public outreach, and then get into all the way into March and April where we're coordinating with the Bureau and we're getting that phase 3 report in alignment because we do want the Bureau to review and be in alignment with what the phase 3 report says. At that point, we have a report that the city and the Bureau are in agreement with. And that was always our plan all the way from 16 years ago, was to make that the Bureau collaboration on phase 3. And I guess we were pretty lucky because now knowing how important that collaboration is going to be, it's going to, I think, really be a benefit to the project to see where we go. So what's beyond? Investigate USBR collaboration, coordinate with the Coconino Plateau stakeholders, more right-of-way, think about starting NEPA, the environmental process, investigate and monitor funding, which ties in with the previous discussion, do a final design and get it constructed. So that's what's left to do. Now, when we get done with the phase 3 report, Jeff and I are done with our scope. And obviously we'd love to continue, but anyway, that is our endpoint finally that we would get to. So it's been an honor to work on it. And thanks for listening. I'm not sure if my half hour probably busted it a little bit. But that's our report today. No decisions for you today, only to just listen and be updated. I guess at this point, we open it up for questions.
Commissioner Vane?
Defer to Kurt if he has questions now.
No, I was just gonna say, if John could run it from, I can't really see anybody at this point. That picture is kind of dead on my screen, so go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this report, and it's wonderful to see the full scope of this. It's a monumental task that you've been involved in and engaged in. One important part, could you walk us through again what the logic was on the 7-month pumping schedule? I guess I don't quite understand that yet. Once you put in that huge amount of capital investment,
Right.
you know, the typical thought would be you use it to as great an extent as possible, but yeah, talk us through that if you will.
Yep. Brad, I may ask you to help here if you can, but I believe at the time the thought was the delivery schedule would coincide with a high season water demand in the city. So it would be more of a peak shaving facility where when the demand starts coming up, then that's when you would start pumping. Brad, can you improve on that answer?
Chairman, Water Commissioners, nice, and it's an honor to be in front of you again. Doug, that's exactly correct. Doug put in a slide in there that, you know, that decision will be made later, but initially to size the piping, those were some of the conversations. Again, that was like 16 years ago. We came up with that out of the 2009. So that's Rob, that decision point will be made later, exactly how to operate and to integrate, assuming the city were to move forward.
Could those operation decisions actually influence the pipe sizing then?
Yes.
Yeah, given what you outlined as far as the operating practice, it sounds like it starts with a trickle.
Yeah.
If you're just peak shaving.
And can I bring up one more thing? I apologize. So the conversations with the tribes along the way, they had the same similar comment to the city when we talked about that. And we said, obviously, if it becomes a regional project and we have, the city were to have customers on the way, as the tribal partners have contemplated, it would be a full-time water supply.
I see. So other customers may take it year round, even if Flagstaff only took it 7 months or something of that sort.
Yeah, the conversations we had with the tribes were they absolutely, if they were to be a partner, they would want it year round.
And one thing I'll add about the right of way is that based on the amount of space that we have talked to ADOT about and so on, is it's really a single pipeline project. A future parallel pipeline is not being discussed. And so it's a really critical decision to get the size right. We tried based on the information that we had back in 08 and 09, but there is an analysis of the delivery schedule, the power costs for that, the cost of the pipe material and how those offset each other. And we could certainly do a new economic pipe size on that basis. The caution is, and we find this with a lot of municipalities, is don't squeeze it down too much. You try to lean as big as you can or as you can afford.
Commissioner Bills, I think you got your hand up.
No, I don't think so. I thought it was down.
Okay.
Commissioner,
Any others?
Malcolm?
Go ahead.
Commissioner
Go ahead.
Alter?
You have to kind of start out with a joke. So how much can we get for Red Gap Ranch? I think the only way this project will ever be funded would be to tack it on with the water rights stuff, but I guess it's too late for that, and that wasn't going to happen anyway. I just don't ever see this project getting funded with its high price tag. And maybe that's really about all. I got a question. The folks who originally bought the ranch must have had, granted a ballpark, but they must have had a ballpark estimate of what it costs to run a pipeline that far. I mean, even if it didn't consider any right-of-ways or challenges like that, somebody must have at least said, yeah, it's going to be about a 24 or 30-inch pipe, and that's cost X dollars a foot, and it's so many miles. What was that original estimate, and how much has it changed to the 450?
Brad.
Sorry, can I jump in? Commissioner
Please.
Alter, that's a good question since I've been around for not quite as long as Lee, but certainly as this Jacobs project. I believe I published something. The city had done some work in 2011. I believe it was 200 or 250 for the pipeline and the pump. I think it was somewhere right. I'd have to go look at that document, and I could do so while we're talking, but I think that was the original estimate.
So then just my last question, I guess, is this viable for a city water source given this estimate?
Depends where you get the money from.
Yeah, if I could jump in, it is viable. These projects do happen. And Kevin Black, actually, Kevin, if you want to come on and if you feel like addressing that question, I know you've seen a lot of these projects come on. How would you like to answer that question?
Well, hello, Chairman and Commissioners. Thank you for a minute to say hello and to introduce myself. I retired from the Bureau just over a year ago as Chief of Planning and Program Development. What we don't have as of yet are the cost of delivery of water, which will be, I think, helpful to answer your question. But these projects do indeed happen, and they do get funded through various different federal programs. The Bureau of Reclamation has funded a number of these. And so there's much work to do to get to that point of fully understanding the cost of delivery of the water. But uh, it was determined viable many years ago when there were discussions about acquiring the ranch as a long-term supply, the economics of which was based on population and water demand in the present or in the future. So we're going to embark on that planning level, working with the Bureau of Reclamation, have had some initial discussions with them. And we'll be able to report more detail of that, I'm sure, in future presentations to the commission.
Thank you.
You bet.
To Mr. Black's point, will the cost of delivery of water be part of the Phase 3 report?
I'm not familiar with the scope of the Phase 3 in detail because the Bureau needs to, as I understood it, to engage with Jacobs and City of Flag team here to develop that. But indeed, there should be an understanding of that cost of delivery, even at the very early stage level.
To add to that, the goal of the Phase 3 report is to have the Bureau look at the criteria that we've used and see if they can comment on that. So if the criteria has changed in any way, and let me just use the depth of cover as an example. We've assumed that 4 feet is a reasonable depth of cover for a transmission pipeline cross country. If they disagreed with that and said, well, we think we really should be deeper, then that will increase our cost. And conversely, if they say we've done cross-country pipelines with 3.5 feet of cover, that's a huge help to us because of the hard rock that we have to get through that's down there below 6 feet. So I do think the cost will change as a result of the phase 3 study and when we bring the Bureau into the equation.
I understand the capital costs will change, but is part of your scope of work, are you expected to deliver an estimated cost of water delivery, cost per acre foot or, on whatever basis you calculate that?
I'm not sure, but to me, that's easily done. If that's something valuable, then we'll figure it out.
I would comment on, just briefly on that, the cost of delivery of water, operation, maintenance, and replacement costs, OM&R, those are all aspects of the Bureau's required investigation. So if we do see the Bureau join this process and it does move forward, then I would assume that there would be a set of data available to the commission.
A comment then for Director Jones and Councilmember Sweet. This is a massive amount of work. It's impressive. It's exciting, a big project like this. But I think we shouldn't get swept away by the glamour of a big project. The important thing is to compare this with the other, ultimately is to compare this with the other alternatives. And if we're not putting the effort into studying the other alternatives, we will have nothing to compare to. And in 2019, we had extensive discussions with council. And at that time, council members said, oh yes, we will in parallel study the other alternatives, in parallel with the Red Gap Ranch project. From the budgets we've seen, that simply has not happened. We've continued putting, lots of money after this study, which is important, but we haven't put comparable funds towards studying the other alternatives. And I just worry that come a year from now or whenever the decision point is, we'll have a number for this project, but we'll be ignorant about the other possibilities.
John Nauman here. Beyond the $422 million, that's your approximate cost currently for the pipeline and pumping, right?
Yes, sir.
What additional costs, and this maybe you can answer or the city staff can answer this, what are the additional costs we have yet to see? Beyond, at Red Gap Ranch, in Flagstaff, what are those additional costs at the either end of the pipeline going to be that we don't know what they are yet, or do you have a feel for that?
So just taking a look back at these assumptions that went into it. First of all, the well field and collection system. That will be an additional cost for sure. The overhead power supply or solar array is an additional cost. Those are the main things.
Okay.
Brad, am I missing anything? I'm just trying to think of some of the additional components that were discussed during the settlement phase.
No, those are them. The only thing I think I would add is how it gets terminated into the city and where, and then what does that look like? Is it a storage tank or, how does that get integrated into the city's actual system? And maybe Shannon can, have something to say on that. But I think that's one other, but that gets farther along in the design. Should it move that far? But I think that might be one extra cost that's not mentioned.
Yeah, I was just trying to get a feel. Is it, we're talking $50 more million or 10 million, 100 million? Ballpark.
No, I couldn't comment on that. I know there are some numbers out there, but I don't know what they are.
Okay. Malcolm.
Yeah, Robert got me thinking about maybe a couple of things you should think about as you move forward with your presentation to council and others. There's a couple of basic questions I think people are going to ask that you need to probably be prepared to answer. I think Robert hit on one, what are the alternatives? Are they cheaper? Why aren't we looking at this or that? And I don't want to go into specifics, but yeah, isn't there something cheaper to meet this demand? And the other thing I think that's really important is a timeline. If I was a council member, I'd probably want to hear, we need, according to the current growth rates for the city of Flagstaff metro area, we will need Red Gap Branch water by year, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I don't know, I haven't heard that. Do we really, when do we need it?
Malcolm, just real quick, part of my 5 slides was the timing and the alternatives touching on that. And we can save those for August. Perhaps we bring those back sooner than later.
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe we should do that.
John Nauman here again. I think one key thing to keep in mind too is the timing of the projects on the Navajo and Hopi and the other reservation involved in this, in terms of, that west, Navajo pipeline coming up. I mean, that's probably, the timing of that has got to be decades out, or I'm not sure. What is the timing of that pipeline? Anybody know? Because if that gets built quickly, then the need, I don't know how the water distribution system is going to look, but the needs for water will be less from Red Gap Ranch if that water can come from another source. Do you see what I'm driving at here? So how does this coordinate with how we would develop Red Gap Ranch? And in terms of what the needs of the Native American tribes are, so.
I would just say, this isn't a direct response, but we wanted to come today and inform you and update you of the pieces of puzzle that you do have. And there may be more questions than answers right now, but at least you know what answers you do have. You know what your pipeline, pump station, and treatment process looks like, and it's developed to a 10% design level. That's what we have for you. And everything else that fits in with that is, there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I appreciate all this. I mean, this is a really good baseline piece of information that we need to then tie into everything else. So I appreciate your presentation.
This is Kurt, a couple of points. So I just want to go back to Aaron. Yeah, if we have, I can't remember if we have a meeting in August or if we skip August, but either way, the next meeting, looking at timing relative to when we need to make decisions about supply. Let's just put it that way. We've had a lot of discussions in the past that really our responsibility to the city is to develop, find, think about as many possible sources of water, and then look at the economics when it's time to bring more online and make those best decisions we can, right? So to Commissioner Bain's point, if we need to start making decisions in a year, well, let's just talk about, DPR, IPR. We got to have to figure out how that's going to play into the new sewage treatment plant and those kind of, and have that as a possibility, right? We owe that to people. So I think it's going to be really critical to understand when do we need to start phasing things in and phasing more water in and work backwards from that. The second part is we have to look at the alternatives. We don't have to do 100, but let's look at the 2 or 3 that make sense. And Red Gap Branch is already bought. DPR, IPR is a known thing. So I think we should need to focus on those and come back to those and really suss those out to see what might be the best solution, or a blend of the two. I don't know, but we'll have to get there. The third thing is we really need to look at the 10-year plan for each one of the swim lanes, and that is for reclaimed water, for sewage, there's some big expenditures out there that I don't think are being understood completely or formed up by city council or others, and we don't want to surprise anybody. I mean, we know there's a big bill coming for sewage in some way, shape, or form. It's bigger than a bread box. Red Gap Ranch, bigger than a bread box. So we need to make sure that people have the visibility so they can start, how do they get the grants? How do we get the funds? And not just drop it on everybody in their bill. So it's going to be really important we start laying out that long-term view of capital requirements. And that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Kurt. You hit on a couple points I wanted to just remind everyone of. Advanced water purification, the draft rules just came out. We've been waiting. The community has been waiting on what requirements ADEQ will include for a treatment process, for example. And just a reminder that starting in around 1999, Scottsdale has invested over 20 years, $500 million in their water reuse systems, and they're not to direct potable reuse, and now they're looking at that. So those alternatives are expensive as well, and we've been engaged. These two projects are very different. A 40-mile pipeline project, the feasibility study is very different than an advanced water purification, and we are kicking off our wastewater treatment master plan, where we'll be working on those alternatives as I understand the scope of work. So I think we're just positioned really, really well to secure Flagstaff's water future. We are looking at the alternatives, and we just have so many options. We're in a great spot, and it's something to celebrate. So I just thought I'd close with that, and we'll keep the conversations coming forward to the commission.
Yeah, John Omdigan, I really agree with that, Aaron. This has been some fantastic work on the legal settlement, on this pipeline, general design work, and laying it out. So really appreciate that. I guess my point is, and it goes to Malcolm's, is for this pipeline to be built, and I'm glad you have somebody who's just retired from the Bureau in your team, because it's going to have to be funded with grants, earmarks, or something, because there's no way the city has the bonding capacity to ever do this in the near future or the long distance future. So I think that's the plan we need to be working on. It's just, that's just the financial facts. There's no way we can afford this kind of a project funded by the city.
The other specialty Kevin has, just being part of the Bureau, are these wastewater treatment plant reuse alternatives as well, and those kinds of feasibility studies, just the whole process of getting, I'll just say, earmarked for, construction dollars, getting to that point. So he's on our team. The scope is broader than just Red Gap. It includes reuse as well. Kevin, maybe you want to add to
So the Bureau has a number of grants and programs. They are deeply engaged at this time in DPR, and in fact, working with the city of Cottonwood as we speak to advance a feasibility study for DPR. So there's going to be much more to share here about all of these various options. I just wanted to say that the Bureau's process requires a full vetting and investigation of alternatives to compare and contrast. And so and to determine costs, cost benefits, economic viability in order to be able to secure federal funding. So there's going to be much more to share here, and I think you'll be informed of that process soon, as we've started those discussions with the Bureau right away. And I'm excited to join you all. I met Lee, I think, when I was a young man. It seemed like in the 90s we began working together, and so I'm very familiar with a lot of what you have been talking about, and your questions are excellent. And so we'll have, I'm sure, a lot more time to discuss your questions. And thanks, Aaron, for the invite to join you all today.
I have one more little thing. and I won't ask, say, I speak again. It would be nice to have what the operational cost of delivering water is, just in terms of power and the day-to-day delivery, and then factor in, well, it's an impossible number to get at, because if you factor in the cost of water, including the building of the cost of the water would be outrageous, I guess, so it really wouldn't matter, but I guess there are different ways of looking at cost of water, and I certainly don't understand them all. That might be a little 5-minute education process that we might need, so, for what it's worth.
Thanks, John. I might add that this is a lot and amazing work. And so it'd probably be good for all of us to sort of sit and soak on this, no pun intended, and think about what are 2 or 3 themes or questions that we would really like to prosecute over the next 6 months. Because it is a lot, and I don't want to bombard the team with 100 smaller questions. Maybe we can bucketize this into some themes that make it easier to process and analyze. But it's amazing work and exciting to think about the possibilities for the future. But but it's going to be a giant bake sale to pay for this thing. Let me tell you. I mean, that and the other things that we have to do. So, okay, I'd like to sort of wrap up the discussion here and ask Marion if we can have the slides obviously pushed to everybody so we can do some thinking. But if anybody has a really big burning issue, last call for questions. Okay. Aaron, thank you and the whole team for that. It's great progress in terms of getting the agreement done and then being able to start scaling this out. It's something the city's got to be aware of and will need. So fantastic. Okay, moving into section 6, old business. We have none. Anything from 7 in terms of informational items to or from the chair, commission members, or staff?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Item 7. So are there, anybody have any informational items to from the chair, commission, or staff?
Don's hand
this
was
is,
up.
Okay.
yeah, this is Don. I have something that I would like to bring to everybody's attention. About a week or so ago, I had an opportunity, along with another USGS hydrologist, to present an update to the committee members of the Flagstaff Regional Water Plan on the state of groundwater in northern Arizona, northern and central Arizona. And during the Q&A period at the end of the discussion, one of the committee members brought up the topic of data centers and their water use. And I was a little bit surprised by that because I hadn't heard of it before. So I decided to do a little digging. And what I found out was that what she was referring to as data centers are what I'm used to thinking of as data farms. And these are essentially big, acres and acres in size buildings that house banks and banks and banks of data servers that provide data storage, the cloud that everybody is aware of and uses these days, as well as data processing, data management, and evaluation, and the processing power needed to run large search engines like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Navadia, and others, and the processing power required to run virtual assistants and chatbots and soon to be ubiquitous AIs. Well, evidently, according to the committee member, there is the potential for a bunch of these data centers / data farms being built along the Interstate 40 corridor from west to east across to Arizona. And, about 10 to 15 years ago, I remember hearing about a number of them being built on both the east and west coast to handle the country's data needs back then. If this is true, obviously, those data farms have already outgrown their usefulness. The issue is the kind of water demand and energy that these data farms use. Just a medium-sized data center can use about 300,000 gallons per day, or about 110 million gallons per year, 336 acre feet per year. That's essentially equal to the water demand of 100,000 homes. A large data center can use anywhere from 1 to 5 million gallons per day, or about 1,100 5,600 acre feet per year, to say nothing of the power needs and attendant water use to cool the power plants for these data centers or data farms. Uh, the power needs, for example, for a medium-sized data farm are on the order of 30 kilowatt hours per day to run the servers, the swamp coolers, and or air conditioning units. And obviously all that power demand means additional water use to cool off the power plants. So water usage, one of the things about the water use for the data farms is they don't require or need fresh water to cool down the servers. They can use saline or salt water. That's one of the reasons I have to assume why they were built on the east and west coast to begin with. But if you start to string these along the Interstate 40 corridor from west to east, you're going to be using a lot of very good quality water from groundwater as the only reasonably close by source. And how acceptable is it going to be to do that? The other thing that may cut down on the water use is, these data farms could be using closed loop systems similar to what's used in nuclear power plants. But still, the water demand is going to be there if these data farms do end up coming into existence. And it could have a real significant impact on groundwater use in northern Arizona. A somewhat positive aspect of this, particularly when you get to the eastern part of the state, where the water chemistry is generally poor for most municipal and public water supply, is it may be an opportunity for the Navajo Nation in particular to potentially develop a industry on their reservation lands, that they may be able to develop and use in a sustainable way. I basically did my data search on my smartphone. It took me about an hour, and in that hour, I sat down and figured out that I used about 1 liter of water and about 1 kilowatt hour from a data farm somewhere. So just kind of an FYI, and to keep your ears to the ground for if and how something like this might develop in northern Arizona. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Any other topics?
A brief one from
Chairman Rigman?
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry. I put in the chat, Water Reuse Arizona, the annual symposium at Little America is July 28th to 30th. Just as a reminder for folks. And then Lee Williams with Water Services is leading a Cinchi sludge dehumidifier pilot tour at Wildcat tomorrow from 1 to 2, and Monday the 22nd from 11 to 12. So I imagine he's contacted the commissioners about the tour. I just wanted to make sure that folks knew about it. Thank you.
Commissioner Vane, I think you had something. Thank you, Aaron.
Something brief. This would be a suggestion for a future agenda item. Aaron mentioned the water treatment master plan that you're proceeding, that Water Services is proceeding on, and I'd love to see a presentation on the scope of work for that effort.
I guess can we just get a 30-second update on the 180 Schultz Creek culvert work?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nauman. So the work at the 180 crossing continues. The box culvert has been extended underneath the 180. Again, we're anticipating probably about another week before it moves to like substantial completion, but currently it will begin to convey water. As of now, that it would do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll continue those updates over by the next meeting. Those things are wrapping up, but the box culvert is continuing to progress and is now out of the right of way. So we made it across the street. It's a huge task.
Good to hear.
Get across the street.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nuts. That's a lot. Okay, any other items? All right, we will move to item 8, which is adjournment. And thank you to everybody for really an amazing amount of work around Red Gap, and also the clarity on the 2024 water production plan. So thank you to the team, and we look forward. Oh, Marion, I cannot remember if we do an, sorry, if we have a August meeting or not. I had in the back of my head that we don't, or do we? So if we can clarify that, we don't need an answer right this second, but I thought.
Yes, we do have an August meeting.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, all right, then I'm thinking of another commission, and I will adjourn the meeting at 6:34. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I should have said, nope, we're going to cancel. Oh.